When working with Premiere Pro, it is absolutely necessary that you have an organized file system. So for this particular course, you're going to have a folder called Time. If you're working on a Mac, wherever you put your Time folder, you can drag the icon for that Time folder over underneath the word Favorites. And then when you are saving files and things, you'll be able to find it immediately on the sidebar under Favorites. This project is called Slowness. If I want to have even quicker access to that folder, I can also put that on the favorites bar. And then inside of that, I will have all of my materials for Slowness. When I come to Premiere, the first thing that I'm going to do is go to File, New Project. Now, a project is not just a document. It might contain multiple documents, multiple timelines for this particular project. So we want to, again, make sure that we are organized. I'm going to call this Slowness. And then very carefully, I'm going to look at the location and go to Browse and make sure that I am putting it in my Slowness folder. And now you can see here why it becomes important to bookmark these folders. I could go into Time and then Slowness, or I could just go directly here. And this will create where my Adobe Premiere Pro autosaves go. And in those autosaves, that is going to be your automatic backup. If anything goes wrong in the process of you editing, you will have backups every half hour or hour that you can go back to and save your work. So I'm going to choose to put that in my Time Slowness folder. I can always just, for reassurance, I can always just click over here on Scratch Disks and make sure that my Scratch Disks are going to the same place. Then I'm going to say OK. Since I already had a file with that name, it's just asking me if I want to replace it. For you, you won't have that dialog box. So now what I have is my project open. Really important is to not get confused between projects and sequences. A project can contain multiple sequences, which means multiple timelines. So I could do a timeline of somebody running across a field, and that will be sequence 1. Then I have a timeline of somebody catching a basketball, that's sequence 2. I do not need to do a new project for the running across the field or the catching the basketball. I will do them all in the same project unless I am doing, so for instance, if I was doing a documentary, I would have one project for that, multiple sequence, which are essentially multiple timelines, and I would only do a new project if it was really very, very separate from what I'm currently working on. So now that I have my project set up, it's always a good idea to go ahead and make sure that it's saved. Since I already chose what the project was being called and where I was putting it, that will automatically saved. If you had forgotten or did not do that step, it will do something similar to Save As, which it will bring up this window and prompt you and ask you where you want to save it. Something really helpful to realize about these dialog boxes is that they almost always have an expansion on them. So this is why we tend to put things on our desktop. But if you click on the expansion, you will notice immediately that you have your favorites bar over here on the side. So then it becomes just as easy as putting it on the desktop to put it into a specific folder that I've bookmarked here ahead of time. Okay, the next two things I'm going to do is, one, I'm going to create a new sequence, and then two, I'm going to import my still images. So first I'm going to do File, New Sequence, and this is essentially my timeline. And I want to decide on what size it's going to be and how many frames per second it's going to be. You can see here that I already have a custom preset. You will not necessarily have that. So the preset that we're going to use is XD Cam HD 422. So right now it's all the way at the bottom. I'm going to select that and open it up. And then I'm going to choose 1080p and I'm going to open that up until I see the XD Cam HD 422 1080p 30. So this is 1080 is the number of pixels high that the document will be. And if I look over here, I can see that it is 1920 pixels horizontally by 1080 vertically. So it's 1080 high by 1920 wide. And it is approximately 30 frames per second. Here you'll see it's 29.97. It's 30 frames per second. So I'm going to select that. In order to get this preset, which will come in handy if I'm going to be making multiple sequences for a particular project, the way that I get that preset is to select what I want, then go to Settings, then go all the way down to the bottom here and go to Save Preset. I recommend for this project that you call this Time Preset, mostly because all the projects that we're doing for this course will be the same preset. So you could call it Time Preset Slowness, but pretty much guarantee you that the following projects will also have the same preset. I'll give it a different name just because I already have my time preset there. It'll take a couple minutes to load, but the next time you come and you go to File, New Sequence, you will then see these sequence presets and you'll see your custom one here available. You can always check what the settings are over here. And then it's always a good idea to give your sequence some kind of a name. So I could leave this as this is my first sequence, or I could completely change it, but eventually you won't know the difference between sequence 1 and sequence 09. So let's go ahead and say that this is slowness, and I'm going to say this is slowness face, because maybe I'm trying out one with a face and another one with a basketball, for example. So I want to have some idea of what it's going to be about. And then I'm going to say OK. Now this will show up in my library folder, but what I'm really interested in is my project folder. So I might either see my project folder if I look in this box on the lower left, or it might not be super obvious, so I may need to go up to Window, Project, and if you look here, that just brings that to the forefront. So library is still there, project is still there, but going to Window and choosing the thing that I'm looking for will make sure that it is, the tab is pulled forward. So here's my sequence, and my sequence has now gone live on the timeline. So I now have a timeline. Until you make a sequence, you will not see a timeline. I can then, later, I could make a second sequence. I could choose the same preset. I could give it a different name. Let's say this one was about a ball. I could give it the name ball. I'll have another sequence. When you have more than one sequence, you'll see that there become tabs over here. At any time, I might close these tabs, similar to an internet browser. In order to bring them back, I'm going to double click on them in the project folder. Now my project folder right now is in list mode. Yours will probably default to icon view. So down here on the bottom, you can switch back and forth between icon and list. Once you start to have a lot of things going on here, I find it can be really helpful to be in list mode. Now that I have my, my sequence, I'm going to check to make sure it's the sequence that I want that's there. I'm then going to go to File, Import, and bring in my still images. So I'm going to go to my slowness folder, and here are my 6 images. And I'm going to click on Import. They come into my project folder, and I'm then going to drag them out onto the timeline. So let's say this timeline was closed. If I dragged them out onto the timeline without having a sequence open, the problem would be is that it would create a sequence. You can now see that there is this, that you can see by the icon here, that it says there's some kind of sequence here, but you can see that this is vertical. My images were accidentally done vertically. I'm going to do Command Z or Edit Undo and undo that. So you don't want to, and then I'm going to take this sequence and take it away. So I don't want to just drag this onto a timeline that does not already have a sequence. I want to have this, my slowness sequence open. Then I want to click on the first image, hold down Shift, and click on the last image, and drag this out onto the timeline. Then I'm just going to keep my thumb on the trackpad or my finger on the button on the mouse and give myself some time to figure out where I want to put this. You'll notice if I drag it down on the lower half of the timeline, where it says A1, 2, 3, 4, nothing is showing up. That's the audio layers. So V1, 2, 3 are the video layers. So I want to be on a video layer, and I want to be at the beginning of my timeline. So I'm going to drag it over and release. If you brought it out, you accidentally let go of the button, there's no reason to panic. Just click off, click outside of the area where you see your images, click and drag over them until they have turned gray. Grab them, keep your thumb on the button, and pull them over to V1 until you get to the very beginning. Okay, now your images are on the timeline. You can see that they do not fit perfectly into the box. Even if you shot horizontally, your images might be a slightly different size than our preset. That's okay. You will be able to resize this. But before we get to that, let's go ahead and get our timing correct. So let me click and drag over these images. Then what I'm going to do is right-click on a mouse or hold down the Control key on a Mac and click and scroll down till I get speed duration. Now I want the total duration of, or I want the duration of each of these clips to be 20 seconds so that the entire duration becomes 2 minutes. And really important here when I have multiple images to click on Ripple Edit. I can go into this more detail in class, but you want to have Ripple turned on. Then I'm going to go to duration and I'm going to type in 2000. If you want to see how that looks, you can then click on the tab. You could click on OK and you'll be fine, or you can click on the tab key and then you can see how this looks in terms of time. This is saying 20 seconds, and then these are fractions of a second. So previously it was 4 seconds. Now each of these clips will be 20 seconds. I'm going to say OK. Let me go back for a second and show you what happens if I do it without doing Ripple. 2000, hit tab, you can see that. You can see that only one of these frames was expanded to 20 seconds. So I'm going to hit Command Z, right click or Command click, make sure Ripple is turned on. This time I'll just type 2000 and I'll trust that the separation will be intact, and you can see that this comes out the same. And if you look at where the bar is at the top, you can see that that is at approximately 2 minutes. So now I've got my timing correct. Next, I'm going to put in my transitions, and then last, I'm going to do my cropping or resizing. You can do this in whatever order you want as long as you touch on all of these aspects. So to do my transitions, and also just to familiarize yourself with the timeline, this bar down here at the bottom will slide you back and forth on the timeline. If I grab on the little square here, I can, it's a little bit counterintuitive. As I make the bar longer, it makes the elements in the timeline smaller. As I make this bar smaller, it stretches out the elements on the timeline. I can also go between V1 and A1, and since right now I'm not using audio, if I go between and I get this little icon to show up, double bar with 2 arrows, I can pull that down so that I have a little more space for my video. And then there are also scroll bars here on the left-hand side or right-hand side. I can scroll those up, and then I actually sometimes, depending on the detail of your work, you'll sometimes get a preview of the images. So even without that, What I want to do is go to the space in between the image and click on it, and you'll see that the cursor will change the look and feel, and that as you click on that little cut, so these are basically images that are lasting 20 seconds, then they're cut, it's turning into a new image, then it's cut. So click on that cut, and I'm going to hold down Control or right click on the PC. So on the Mac, hold down Control, or if your trackpad is a smart trackpad and will do a right click, use that. And you'll see here that it says Apply Default Transition. Then I'm going to need to zoom in and scroll over to see that transition. That transition is a cross dissolve. You see, this is one image, this is the other, and this transition is cross dissolving from one to the other. So if I grab on to the end of this, like this is a piece of Scotch tape put on top of two pieces of film, and I pull this out, what I want to do is have this cross dissolve go from the halfway point. So halfway through this image, it starts to very, very slowly cross dissolve into the next image. So I'm going to use that same process for each cut. Control or right click, apply that. Now you might find that sometimes when you try to grab on the cross dissolve, you accidentally grab on the image. If you do that, just hit Command Z. And this gives you an opportunity to get familiar with the workspace, zooming in and out, grabbing onto things, pulling them out, moving over. And again, your goal is to get this as close as possible to the halfway point between halfway across this image. You'll do that to each cut, and you'll also do it at the beginning and the end. So if I go to the beginning here and I do Apply Default Transition, click on that and pull it out. What this is transitioning between is the image and nothing, and in Premiere, in video, nothing is black. So this will give you an automatic fade out of black, fade into the image, then a crossfade from the image into the next image. We'll do this to each of the cuts, and then we'll do this again at the very end. And when we do that at the very end, that will also do a crossfade to black. Okay, so that is essentially everything, except then we have aesthetic and conceptual decisions to make. So that's all of the technical stuff. But clearly my images don't fit on the page. So if I want to make those fit, I can move the playhead along the timeline and then also click on the image on the timeline. You can see if I click on this image, that will be different than if I click on this one. So I want the playhead to be hovered over the image that I want to work with. Then I come up here to the preview and double click on the image until I get this blue bounding box. And then I can grab onto the edge and I can enlarge or shrink it down, depending on play the image. Then I can also grab onto it and move it. And then I'll come to the next image, click on that image, double click, pull that up, and while I'm on the crossfade, I can decide whether I want things to align, like here, align. So misalignment can also be interesting. It's simply up to you how you want it to align and crossfade as it goes across. So I can do that to each image and each crossfade. Now let's say that sometimes when you bring the images in, they might come in the reverse order. If I need to put them into a slightly different order, I can do that as well. I could take this image, and I can also use a different video track if I want to do that. So I could pull this one up here, and then one by one, pull them up in the reverse order. or even possibly rearrange them. And then I'm going to zoom back in. And if I do that, I may need to go back in and adjust some of my cross dissolves. So I can always click on a cross dissolve and hit delete, and then I can go to the split and apply the default transition. Make sure I have highlighted it. Maybe I need to zoom in a little bit more. So you'll have to become familiar with this and decide in what order you want to do this. Whether you may want to rearrange them and get them in the correct order first. Make sure you have the duration. Put the crossfades in, and then crop or move them around until you like how they are cross-dissolving one into the other. And then you can always take the playhead and go to the beginning or go to any point on the playhead, on the timeline, I'm sorry, and you can hit the space bar or you can hit the play button, either one, and it will play and show you how the cross dissolve works. When we get to sound, we'll be bringing that in a similar way, and we'll be applying that to the audio tracks.